All right. So I guess my name is Nick All. I am part of the Mequon Nature Reserve and part of the conglomerate of the coalition itself, which is made up of 5 different organizations. The Knoll Cutright Bird Club, River Edge Nature Center, Mequon Nature Center, the Friends of the Cedarburg Bog, and the Lac La Rand Conservancy, which are all in the southeastern Wisconsin area. And I guess Carl can maybe kind of explain how this group came together as well, if you'd like to. But.
I think missing from tonight is John O'Donnell, who's up in a cabin in northern Minnesota without internet access, but the trade-off is he gets to be 20 below zero tonight. So John and I worked together, and John really did all the hard work trying to assemble these organizations so that we could do year-round programming, both indoors and outdoors, both in person and virtual, with the realization at that point that COVID. At that point, we thought COVID, might be gone. When we started this late last summer, early fall, we thought, maybe by now, COVID might be sort of under control, and we'd be doing mostly in-person meetings. But the virtue of planning ahead, as we did, was we're ready for the fact that people still aren't real comfortable putting 45 of us, and there's several couples here on the tonight. So we got about 50 people. 50 people in a room is not what everybody wants to do these days. So the fact that we can do a meeting like this, the fact that we can offer this programming through these 5 organizations, the fact that we already have in mind a number of all sorts of other things.
There you
go. There you
go. And the fact that we have this large audience that is available. I just got a message, my connection's unstable. I'll turn off my camera shortly. Anyway, so that was the theory behind it, and the fact that we have 50 people here tonight, maybe a few more even as a couple more people have come on board, indicates that we can do this. And we hope by involving some of these other organizations that didn't already have this sort of programming, that we could probably draw in a new and hopefully younger audience too. I mean, that's the problem with a lot of organizations these days, is that they tend to they aren't bringing enough new blood into the organizations. People who will be the next generation to care about birds and do more for conservation. So that's a little bit of the history of this, and I'll pitch it back to Nick at this point.
Yeah, that's great. Can everybody hear me still? Good to go. All right. Yeah. So thank you, Carl, for helping kind of get all these organizations together and really, kick off this bird club. But I guess without further ado, I know everybody's busy this time of year. So what better way to celebrate World Wetland Day than to talk about a species that is pretty obligate to wetlands. I'm sure most of us around southeastern Wisconsin are familiar with wood ducks as a waterfowl species. But today we have Jake Shurba, and he'll be talking about wood ducks, but in a little bit different region than I think that we're typical of seeing, I guess, more of the Southeast United States. And he'll definitely be able to, explain the work that he does and the research that he is partaking in as part of his master's and hopefully his PhD. So yeah, Jake, you should be able to share. I believe I gave you permission, or you should be able to share your screen with everybody.
All right.
Make sure that.
Good go. Can everyone see that?
Yeah, I got it on my end.
Perfect.
All right.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Nick, for reaching out. Nick and I went to school together at Stevens Point, and so it was kind of a nice, good time to catch up. It's been a little bit since we had actually talked, so thanks for reaching out and for giving me the opportunity. I will say, hearing y'all talk about the weather certainly makes me not regret my decision to move south. I'm currently in Florida right now at one of my old field sites. And we were at a balmy 70 some degrees today. So hearing talk of 20 below is not making me regret my choice right now. I don't miss the cold. But I'm here today to chat with y'all a little bit about my master's thesis research, which is focusing on a couple of different aspects of waterfowl ecology, specifically focusing on wood ducks in particular. Before we really get started, though, a little bit about who I am. I am a wildlife disease ecologist and graduate student at Clemson University. For those of you who maybe are not aware of this field of disease ecology, it's essentially an offshoot of wildlife science. And what we tend to focus on is how pathogens or agents of disease impact individual wildlife species. But then from there, how those pathogens can sometimes spill over into other animal species and sometimes into human species as well. There's a lot of examples of these. We usually refer to them as zoonotic diseases, which are ones that can transmit between animals and people and vice versa. We also study things like vector-borne diseases, which are those that are carried usually by some form of insect or arachnid host. So examples of these would include things like Lyme disease or West Nile virus, zoonotic diseases like rabies, even COVID-19 is technically considered a zoonotic disease. So these are all things that we kind of tend to study. I graduated from UW-Stevens Point in 2018 with my bachelor's in wildlife ecology, specifically focusing on disease research. And I got my first job out of school working for Clemson University as a field research technician on the pilot study of the project that would then become my master's, which is what I'm here to talk with y'all about tonight. Oops, there we go. Before I do begin though, I do want to highlight the Kennedy Center. It is based out of the Baruch Institute of Coastal Ecology and Forest Science, which is on the coast of South Carolina. If you can see my cursor here, Clemson is all the way up here in the what we call the upstate of South Carolina, the very northern, essentially, portion of the state. However, my main office is technically based down on the coast. And you can see that's our building right there. This is a relatively new building, sort of managed by Clemson University as well as the University of South Carolina. Both have field sites on this location. But this is where the James C. Kennedy Waterfowl and Wetland Center is housed. There are about 12 Kennedy centers kind of scattered across North America. There's 2 in Canada, and then the rest are down in the United States. And these are essentially funded by Jim Kennedy, who is a business owner and businessman here in the United States. And what he does is he funds university programs to have a specific faculty member that's there to just teach waterfowl and wetlands based science, as well as take on graduate students to then continue passing the torch on to create new waterfowl and wetland scientists. And that photo on the bottom is just a quick glimpse of what things look like down in the low country of South Carolina. Lots of tidal marsh, brackish marshes. It's very beautiful down here. But y'all are here to talk about wood ducks, and that's probably one of the most exciting things that we could talk about tonight, are these absolutely beautiful birds. This is the wood duck. Latin name is Aix sponsa, which roughly translated out of Latin means water bird in a bridal dress. Doesn't quite maybe match what we would consider to be a wedding dress per se, but the way I look at it is it's a bird that looks like it's dressed in one of the most pretty dresses you could ever see. And this is something that's unique in waterfowl, I would say, too, in a species of animal where we do see a lot of sexual dimorphism, so that difference between males and females in terms of their plumage. Usually the drakes or the males are the ones that are going to have the most beautiful plumage because they want to bring in the ladies. But the hen wood ducks are absolutely gorgeous, no matter what. They have that beautiful plumage on their breast and sides. Their wings are gorgeous. And then that you can't miss that, the unmistakable teardrop shape around their eye. And these are undoubtedly probably one of the most popular species across both of our flyways, not just in the Atlantic Flyway where I'm at, but also where you guys are in the Mississippi Flyway. These are very popular waterfowl species, both from a birder perspective as well as a hunting perspective. The only bird that could probably top them, at least where you guys are, is probably the mallard. They are a common Wisconsin species, especially if you are hiking or birding around areas, what we would call, say, bottomland hardwoods or sort of forested wetland areas. You will see wood ducks a lot because they are secondary cavity nesters, meaning that they're going to be using pre-formed cavities. They don't actually dig out their own cavity. They'll find one that's already pre-formed, and then they'll use whatever nesting material they can find inside of the cavity already. Interestingly enough, though, the wood duck was nearly extirpated from the both the Atlantic and Mississippi Flyway around the early 20th century, mostly due to market hunting. So before the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, before hunting bag limits were put into place, these birds were severely overharvested, specifically for their plumage, but probably more detrimental to them was the loss of their habitat. As I mentioned, they're secondary cavity nesters, so they require what we call old growth trees that have a cavity already formed in there. If you think of how forest management has changed over the years, we now manage forests for a dual purpose, the first and foremost mostly being for human use, but then additionally there's a second side to that where we're managing forests specifically for wildlife use. And so as forest management practices changed, the species populations started to rise again. But the thing that definitely helped preserve the species and their populations as a whole, and where we started to see more of these population climbs, were the placement of these wood duck boxes. In the early to mid 1900s. These boxes were mid 1900s or so. These boxes were starting to be used, and it was noticed that populations were starting to increase over a period of about 5 to 10 years, usually in locations where these boxes were placed for wood ducks. Now, we need to talk about some population ecology terms that you're going to hear me toss around here. I try to keep it to a minimum because population ecologists kind of tend to be pretty boring. We have a lot of larger words that we throw around, and my goal tonight is not to put you to sleep. But I would be remiss if we didn't mention a couple of these terms. And the first is going to be recruitment. Waterfowl populations are very specifically driven by this phenomenon of recruitment, which is where young are added to the fall population through reproduction by adults in the spring population. So we're currently in the spring population breeding season right now, at least here in the Southeast. We already have birds kind of starting to pick their nests out. I was actually out on the water with one of my technicians today, and we were checking some boxes, and there's lots of wood duck sized divots in the shavings where they're starting to kind of feel things out if they want to hang out in those boxes for the season. So we're in the spring population season right now. So these birds are going to have their babies, and hopefully these kiddos will be able to successfully hatch and jump from the box and grow up and then migrate out with mom. And then the hope is that they will migrate out with the fall population and then return the next year to rejoin that population that they came from. Another term that you're going to hear me toss around is the term Phyllopatry, and that's spelled P-H-I-L-O-P-A-T-R-Y, Phyllopatry. And this refers to essentially a bird returning to the same location that they came from. Wood ducks are heavily phyllopathic. About 40% of them will return to use the same box every single year, and roughly about 70% will return to at least the same general area that they came from. They may not use the same box, but they'll at least return to the same area that they had originally nested in previously. So this brings us to our wood duck research here in the southeastern US. This project came about after a meeting in 2018 with about 30 some waterfowl biologists and wetland scientists from a variety of state and federal agencies, as well as university partners and nonprofit organization partners as well. They all got together to discuss, what are some burning questions that we still have about waterfowl here in 2018? What are some things that we still don't know about ducks, and then about their habitat that they use? And one of the primary things that kept coming up during this discussion was wood ducks and how little we actually know about wood ducks, but specifically how little we know about wood duck box populations, box nesting wood duck populations. Because especially here in the Southeast, we have a lot of both. We have a lot of ducks that use these artificial nest boxes, these wooden nest boxes. And then we also have a good amount of ducks who use natural cavities still too. So how are these populations doing as a whole? And the way that we can measure this is through that process of recruitment that I had mentioned prior. The last time a recruitment study was done on wood ducks was in 1986, and it was only done in South Carolina. But what the researchers found was that these wood ducks who are using these wooden nest boxes are not self-sustaining. They can't sustain their own populations without help from hens who are also using these natural cavities as well. Which leads us to another big question of, are these nest boxes still usable? Are we at a point now where we should even still be using nest boxes? Because like I mentioned before, forest management has changed and there's a lot more cavities on the landscape now for them to be able to use. And so that's something that we're trying to, that I'll touch on a little bit later, but that's kind of one of our big picture questions that we're trying to answer with this study long-term, is to see if it's worth keeping nest boxes anymore, at least to the scale that we currently are using them. Our primary objectives, though, from maybe a little bit less of a long-term perspective, are to estimate annual duckling production. So how many babies are coming out of these nest boxes? Number two is to estimate annual female recruitment from nest boxes. If you ask any population ecologist or really any wildlife biologist, most of us are going to say that males don't matter. We don't really care about the boys. It's the girls that are going to be adding to the population. So those are the ones that we want to focus on in terms of this concept of recruitment. Additionally, we're trying to determine if certain habitat characteristics, as well as the style and build of the nest boxes, are going to impact the selection of a box, the success of that box, how many ducklings are being produced, as well as female recruitment. And then finally, we're trying to develop and deliver recommendations to both state and federal agencies, as well as nonprofits and even just the general public, for how they can help wood duck populations, whether that be through the use of nest boxes or other methods as well. And there's some things that I'll be sharing with you kind of at the end of the presentation that you can pass on to other people that you may know as well. I love to throw this slide in here because it shows just how big of a study this is. This is a massive regional study. We are working currently with 8 states with the hope of potentially expanding to more. As of right now, we're sticking with these 8 states, and currently we are on year 3 of 5 of this population recruitment study of wood ducks. My sites that I worked with are in Georgia and Florida. I have a colleague at Clemson who is working with North and South Carolina. And we'll go over the rest of the states here in a minute. But this, a project of this scale requires a lot of people to help, whether that be from a financial standpoint or a housing and equipment standpoint, or even just providing expert help. So we work very closely with state and federal agencies, U.S. Geological Survey, the various Department of Natural Resources, but as well, we work very closely with university partners as well. And then the main nonprofit organization that I want to highlight is the Nemours Wildlife Foundation, which funds a really huge portion of our research. And they are just a very well-known organization down here just for the research that they put out on a regular basis here in the Southeast. In terms of our wood duck research, though, each section is highlighted with one of those little ducks. Orange ducks refer to Clemson. So North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida are all managed by graduate students, including myself, through Clemson. Mississippi is handled with a graduate student at Mississippi State University. All of us are master's students with the exception of LSU in Louisiana, who has a PhD student. And he is the poor soul who's going to actually have to analyze all of the recruitment data at the end of the project. So we'll start sending up prayers for him here soon. And then finally, Delaware and Maryland, we kind of mash them together. That is handled not only by undergraduate technicians through the University of Delaware, but it's also handled with the state agencies as well, have some of their staff working on that project there. And I'll go over, I have lists of boxes and stuff, and I'll throw some data at y'all here in a little bit towards the end of the presentation. But I figured let's start with the ducks first. So first, we want to talk about why do wood ducks choose their specific boxes? A really big part of this project is getting our hands on ducks as much as humanly possible. We want to capture these ducks. We want to age them. We want to take data on their weight, and then we fit them with a leg band as well, so we can keep track of their movements or whether or not they get harvested. Usually every year, I think that's from 2021, I think I had maybe 5 birds get harvested. The furthest one was banded down here in Florida and made it all the way up to Delaware, and that's where she was harvested by a hunter, but that's still fantastic data for us to keep track of. The other thing that we are kind of keeping tabs on, just not for any specific purpose, but just out of simple sheer curiosity more than anything else, is just the differences in color that we see in our wood ducks down here in the Southeast. I worked on a wood duck project when I was up in Wisconsin, and they all kind of looked very similar to that bird in the center, kind of the standard kind of tannish brown plumage, the gray wings with the spattering of blue on there. But for whatever reason, here in the Southeast, we get some really interesting colored birds, like that one on the left. I have never seen wood ducks come that tan before, and we've captured a handful of them working down here. So just another little side thing. I don't think anything will really come of it, but we have a lot of pictures of these just kind of weird colored ducks that we have never personally seen before. So some things that we're looking at then are going to include these variables that we're looking at are hopefully going to help us determine, mostly statistically, but help us to determine why wood ducks choose the boxes that they do. So at the very beginning of the study, we measure a couple of different variables about the boxes themselves, including where the door is. So if it's a top opening box or a side opening box, how close it is to the water, how far the entrance hole is from the water. Because remember, these kiddos, when they hatch and they climb up to the front of that hole, they have to be able to jump out of that box. And now sometimes if they're in natural cavities, they're falling as far as 30 feet. But it's still an important variable for us to collect with these boxes themselves. But then additionally, we're also taking a lot of measurements on the inside of the boxes. How big are they? How far is the roof of the box from the bottom of the box? What size is the entrance hole? Is it circular or elliptical? Or in the case of the picture that you can see there, is it a square? These boxes come in all shapes and sizes. And previous data that we've collected and analyzed have shown that wood ducks, for whatever reason, they like smaller boxes. And we're hoping to continue to see this trend as we start to analyze our data even further. If I had to make a guess about that, it would probably have something to do with, because they are cavity nesting species, most cavities are not very large. And so they tend to go for more of those smaller boxes just because that's what they're either used to or is just ingrained in because that's just what they know, is they know smaller areas are more comfortable. And then from a habitat perspective, we take a lot of habitat data and we take it at specific points during the season. So we take these data at the beginning of the season before all the trees grow out their leaves. And then we take it at the very end of the season when all of the trees have their leaves then. Additionally, we take these data at points throughout the season. We'll take it at a nest box when we find an egg in there, or when a nest has been initiated in a nest box. We'll take habitat measurements there, and then we'll go to the closest box to that one that does not have a nest in it to see if we can maybe compare and contrast habitat with those two boxes to see why she chose that first one over the nearby one. And so some of these variables that we're collecting are things like the water depth and the distance to open water. More often than not, when these kiddos are hatching, they're trying to get as far away from open water as humanly possible, because that's where the predators are. That's where the bullfrogs and the fish are. Here in the Southeast, we have very lovely animals called alligators that will also use wood ducks as a prey source. We've seen alligators sit under a nest box with their mouths open, just waiting for the kiddos to jump out of the box. They're very smart, and they know that that is a food source there. That photo on the top left is how we measure visual obstruction of boxes. And this is important not from a predation standpoint. So if the box is pretty well hidden, you're less likely to have predators in there, but also from a competition perspective. Wood ducks are very competitive, and they are what we refer to as dump nesters. So if a hen has an active box, a nest that she's currently sitting on, other hens will go into that box, drop an egg or two, and then peace out. So they don't have to take care of their babies themselves, which from an evolutionary standpoint is a really great method of having your babies. It's a lot less pressure on you, but we like to try to avoid that because that can eventually lead to nests maybe not hatching. Here in the Southeast, it happens a lot. I think the largest clutch that we found was a box of 55 eggs in Georgia. And we took them out just to put them in a bucket, and I don't think I had ever tried to visualize 55 eggs before personally. And so I had a hard time comprehending that, oh gosh, like, okay, this is what 55 eggs looks like when you look at it. Additionally, we're also looking at things like the distance to the nearest brood cover. We want pretty close brood cover so mom and the kiddos can get out of there as quickly as possible. And then probably the biggest one right now that we're seeing is this canopy cover, which is essentially how much a tree is hanging over a box and shading out that box. Previous studies have shown that wood ducks like areas that don't have much canopy cover, which here in the Southeast doesn't really make sense if you really think about it, just because of how hot it gets down here, especially in the summer. Sometimes these boxes they're getting real toasty in there, but those are the ones that they always go for, are these boxes with little to no canopy cover. Again, part of that might have a predation aspect to it. We've seen snakes who maybe they can't get up the post of the box itself, but if there's a tree hanging over that box, they will climb up into the tree onto the nearest branch that's hanging over the box, and they'll just let themselves drop from the branch so they can hit the box and get in there to get to the eggs as a food source. So these are all things that we're kind of hoping to answer as we continue to analyze our data. Now, I can only imagine the cacophony of ahs and oohs that are coming across the screens right now. But since we're on Zoom, I'm just going to imagine it for myself right now, since y'all are probably muted right now. But this is the best part of the project in terms of recruitment, is actually getting to work with the kiddos themselves. And I have 3 different photos here at the 3 different stages that we usually see these babies. Now, when we get a nest at any of our sites, we track these kiddos from start to finish. So as soon as a nest is, once incubation is initiated, and we know that a hen wood duck has started actually incubating her eggs when she pulls a big mound of down off of her breast and she lays those feathers down on top of the eggs to help start keeping them warm and incubating them. Wood ducks lay about 1 egg per day until they're finished, and a normal clutch is usually between 10 to 13 eggs. So until we either get to that 10 to 13 number, or until she gets to roughly that 10 to 13 number, she won't start incubating those eggs because she wants as many of those kiddos to hatch roughly around the same time as best as she possibly can. So when we get to a nest, we'll take the eggs out of the box and we will take a peek inside of the eggs through a process called candling, which is where we hold an egg up to the light, usually through the sun. Don't look at the sun. We're going to look at the egg, and we're going to look through a black plastic tube, and we'll hold the egg up to the tube. And in doing that, we can see at what stage of development the egg is at. More often than not, we're catching these kiddos right at the start of incubation. So there's not a whole lot really happening inside of that egg. But wood ducks generally are going to be incubating between 27 to 30 days. So we can estimate roughly about what time or what day we should go back to that box to catch the babies. So we usually catch them either at that stage on the far right where they're just starting to pip through that egg. You can see its little egg tooth right at the tip of its beak as it's starting to work through that eggshell. We will see them then. We'll catch them oftentimes on the far left where they're still kind of naked looking, little damp still. They haven't quite poofed out yet. And then finally in the center, when they're really puffy. And I will say they're at the most difficult when they are at that puffy stage, because these are little jumping beans. They have got some hops on them. They're able to jump pretty high. And so we have to keep them in a pretty deep container when we're working with them when they're at this stage, because otherwise they will jump out of our boat when we're working. Now, in order to keep track of these kiddos, because we cannot use a band on them, if we were to try to use a band that's the normal size, it would slip right off that leg. But then if we tried to use a smaller band, it would constrict the growth of the leg, which is why we use these web tags. These web tags are pretty commonly used in a variety of different methods in wildlife. We see them used as ear tags in small mammals. They're also used, the fish squeezers use them too in fisheries biology programs. They use these to tag fish. We came up with a way using some old literature to tag ducklings using these little web tags as well. And this is probably the best way for us to actually perform what we would call a mark recapture study. So we mark these babies and then we try to catch them the next year with their tags still on their feet. It's a pretty easy process. We start first by weighing the babies. So we try to get as accurate of a weight as possible on them. I'm really bummed. I have a fantastic picture of another way that we weigh the babies. We'll use these little weigh boats. We'll also just put them right on the scale if they're not feeling super jumpy. But the best way when they're super puffy is actually to stick them in a pill cup and then just set them on the scale that way. So they kind of hang out in the pill cup, but I have a great picture of just a little duck butt sticking up out of the cup. So I'll try to find that and I'll send it to Nick if I can, but I was unfortunately unable to find it this time. The other things that we do with these kiddos then too is we'll take a tarsus measurement, which is this bone right here in the leg. That's a pretty common measurement when we're working with birds like this. So we'll take a tarsus measurement, a weight, and then we'll also check each baby for the sex. Because like I said, we specifically want females. We tag both males and females just to avoid user error. When we're sexing baby ducklings, it literally looks like a hangnail when you're sexing a boy and the appendage comes out of the cloaca. So it can be kind of hard to miss sometimes. So just to avoid user error, we tag both males and females. And then the process itself, like I mentioned, is pretty easy. We extend that foot, and then we have these modified pliers that we created where we have two scalpel blades that are essentially crammed into a slim piece of wood and then epoxied onto these pliers. So we're able to make two small incisions in the foot and then pop the tag through and seal it then. And this is a method that we've been using since our pilot study in 2019. But the big question that people usually like to ask is, do they actually work? Is it something that's worth continuing to use? What if they fall out? What if they don't work? Are they increasing the potential for these babies to get predated? The short answer is, yeah, they work, and they work really well. This is just one example of a bird that was recaptured as an adult the next year in the same box that she was hatched from as a baby. She came back to that box as an adult and had her own successful clutch. So you can see she's got her two baby web tags on her foot, and then she's got her big girl jewelry on her right leg with that leg band as well. So this is the method that we have found that works really well when it comes to keeping track of these babies. Okay, so I'm going to throw some numbers at you just so you can see kind of the magnitude of our data so far. So in total, over 2 years, we've captured a total of 2,589 ducks. That's going to include wood ducks, hooded mergansers, and black-bellied whistling ducks, because we get all three down here in the Southeast. All three of them are cavity nesting species, and we put bans on the adults because they're there and they're fun. So sometimes it's a nice change of pace from a wood duck to get a giant black-bellied whistling duck in a box. However, 1,226 of that total are just wood ducks alone. That's a lot of birds for 2 years. But keep in mind, this is between 8 states. So we're really racking up the numbers here in terms of our adult hens. In 2020 and 2021, our box numbers themselves, so this is the total number of nest boxes that we studied. We had about 1,300 in 2020. This number climbed to about 1,400 in 2021. This is due to us making some more partnerships with private landowners in particular to expand some of our study sites, as well as just the construction of more boxes in some of our locations. This weird looking X with the bar on top of it indicates the mean of something. So in total, in 2020, we had 84% average of all of our boxes being used across all 8 states. And then that number dropped a little bit to 82% in 2021. The reason why that dropped, at least our estimation for why that dropped, is in a lot of our locations. Last year in 2021, we had a cold snap that came out of nowhere in February, and we actually had eggs that were freezing solid in some of our boxes. So that's partially why the box use kind of dropped. Our ducks got here and said, "What is going on? We didn't come south for this crap." So they took off for a little bit before it warmed up again. And then in 2021, in particular for nesting attempts, we had 2,051 nesting attempts. So that's an individual nest was attempted just in 2021 alone, over 2,000. And that's going to include whether or not the nest was successful or whether it failed. And then the big question that people always want to know is our ducklings. So in total for wood ducks in particular, we tagged 11,351 ducklings between 2020 and 2021. So in 2 field seasons across 8 states, over 11,000 wood duck ducklings were tagged, and 32,475 wood duck eggs were measured and worked with, which is ridiculous. That's insane. That is a huge number of kiddos we worked with. Now, this is the form that I'll send to Nick to hopefully send out to you guys as well. We're starting to kind of work with Wisconsin as well. Wisconsin's hoping to get onto this project in their own way as well, not specifically part of our group, but they're hoping to continue the same general idea of what we're doing out of Stevens Point through the Kennedy Center at Stevens Point. But this is the form that we send out to all of our hunters here in the Southeast, just so that they can be made aware. A lot of people don't really know how to report web tags. It's not explicitly stated because it's a government website, so it's kind of hard to work your way through. It's not very user-friendly. So on this form, we provide instructions for how to report these web tags if you harvest a bird that has one, because that's important data for us to know about. Now, to kind of wrap things up, I'm going to talk a little bit about microbial diversity, which is the additional project that I'm working on right now for my research. There has been very little research that's actually been done on the types of bacterial growth that we can find within these artificial nest boxes, these wooden nest boxes. So a big part of my research is taking random selections of eggs from these boxes, swabbing them, and then culturing the swabs in the lab. And when I say culturing, all that means is I'm growing bacteria in the lab, but it's more fun to say than growing. So we say culturing. Now, we are also running some additional experiments as well to try to provide managers with some ideas for how to prevent microbial growth. And one of those experiments that I ran over the last couple of years was using different types of shavings. Commonly, most managers are going to use either aspen or cedar or pine shavings in their boxes. And so what we did was we took a certain random selection of boxes to be filled with aspen, and then a random selection to be filled with cedar shavings. Aspen is like flour. It has very little to it. And so it can, in my theory, is that it will promote more bacterial growth inside of the boxes, while cedar has a lot of natural oils that can promote an antimicrobial environment. So my guess is that boxes with cedar are going to have a lot less microbial growth, or at least fewer different species of bacteria growing in the boxes because of the use of cedar. I like to throw these in here because they're pretty, but these are some things that we look for when we are growing or culturing bacteria in the lab. We're looking at different types of cell morphology, so what the cell colonies look like. So for this weird one here in the center, those big bright pink ones, that's some really weird morphology that we haven't really seen before in the lab. So these are ones that we take pictures of, we'll set aside. And then other trends that we're looking for too. So you see 3 of those plates have those yellow slimy looking bacteria. That's a trend. Those are 3 different eggs from 2 different boxes in that case. So that's something that we're going to want to look further at. So what we do is we start off by doing something called gram staining, which is where we run these bacterial colonies through a couple different types of stains, and whatever type of color they retain will determine whether they're gram positive or gram negative. So if we see pink or that red, that's a gram negative bacteria. If we see purple or blue, that is a gram positive bacteria. And that's not like we can identify this bacteria just by this. This is usually a start. We can start by saying that something is gram positive or negative, and then we go from there. So that's kind of where we're at right now. I don't have a whole lot more to say on it because we're currently analyzing our data right now. And then we're also kind of pitching around an idea of potentially doing some DNA analysis as well for some of these species that we're seeing trends with, so that we can determine what species it is, or at least try to narrow it down to a general family. Thank you very much for the opportunity to come speak for your group today. I do greatly appreciate it. And I do always put my contact information on these slides too. Please feel free to use it. If there's a question that we don't get to tonight, or if you think of something in the future, please don't hesitate to email me. I'm always really happy to talk about my project and answer questions as best I can, or at least point you in the direction of someone who maybe could.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Jake. This was a great talk. You are definitely a great speaker. It's been good catching up with you. We do have a few questions I see in the chat. If anybody else has questions, please feel free to type them up. That way it just makes things a little bit easier. I'll try to run through the chat and ask Jake the questions, and then he can answer them as best as he can. And then that way, not everybody's yelling at once trying to get their questions answered. So, all right, I think hopefully I can keep this organized. All right, so our first question from Danielle is, do we know who were the primary nesters that created the cavities that wood ducks use in their natural cavities?
Yeah, sometimes we do. That's a good question. Sometimes we do. Oftentimes it's actually a woodpecker. They can create usually a large enough hole for wood ducks to get through. They don't require that big of a space to squeeze through. They're actually pretty small birds. You can hold them like a football usually for the most part. So they're pretty small ducks, so they don't require a whole lot of space. If it's not a woodpecker who makes the cavity though, we often see we have hurricanes down here, and a hurricane, if it rips a tree limb off and creates a small bowl or hole in the a cavity in the tree, they'll also utilize those as well.
Perfect. Next question from Dale. Have you ever encountered a leucistic hen?
I have not. I've seen pictures, but I have not seen one personally down here. Probably the coolest thing we've seen in terms of kind of weird ducks. We have one hen in Florida who we've caught every year that has, she's an old hen. And oftentimes with waterfowl, what you can see in older birds is old females sometimes start to develop male secondary sexual characteristics. So we have a hen down here in Florida who has partially, her eyes are partially red. There's just like weird little blocks of both of her eyes that have look like they're painted red. So that's the weirdest thing that we've seen down here in terms of like the characteristics like that.
Great. Next question, and I believe this is referring to the web tags, but what information is on the tag itself?
Yeah, so it's on the back of the tag. So the tag the part of the tag that's going to be on the bottom of the foot will have state initials on there. The top of the tag will have the number itself on there, and that's it. So it can be kind of hard to determine, but if you see anything like that, you can just report on that reportban.gov. You'll just report what's on the tag itself. And so it'll be the state acronym, excuse me, I'm so sorry, the state acronym, and then the number that's on top of the tag.
Perfect. And then from Heather, how many eggs can a wood duck hen lay in a year? And do they nest more than once per year?
Yeah, so more often than not, wood ducks will get usually 2 clutches out in a year. And in terms of the total number of eggs, it's going to vary. Their average clutches are usually between 6, I think I said 10 to 13. It's more like 6 to 12 eggs. When we do see renests, it's usually because she lost her first clutch. They were predated, usually, not always. Sometimes older hens will pump out 2 clutches in a season because they can. But usually if a hen is having a second clutch, it's usually because there was some unfortunate circumstances with her first round for the season.
Next question is from Catherine. What kinds of bacteria are you finding besides E. coli?
I have no idea. I have no idea. I wish I could give you a better answer. That's something that we're working on right now. And that's why we're hoping to do some DNA analysis as well. Because there's some bacteria that we're just not sure what the heck is growing in some of these boxes.
And then this message or question is from Julia. How can dump boxes best be prevented?
It's not something you can really prevent. You can try, and one of the ways that you can try is by placing boxes in locations where they're going to be semi-covered, usually by vegetation. Here in the Southeast, we're pretty lucky because a lot of our areas have a lot of that tall sawgrass or cut grass, a lot of cattails. And so we're usually able to kind of tuck a box into more of these areas if we are replacing boxes. But for the most part, wood ducks, they know where these boxes are, and it can be hard to prevent dump nesting. And honestly, unless you're having a ton of clutches where you're getting 50 to 60 some eggs, my advisor has reported a box or a clutch of 70 eggs in one box. If you're getting numbers that high, that's really when it's a problem. But we classify a dump nest as any box that has more than 13 eggs. So if you got a couple more than 13, it's not going to be that detrimental to the nest itself. A good number of those are probably still going to hatch. It's more so when you start getting into like the 30, 40, 50 eggs in a single location that it becomes a problem.
Interesting. I guess kind of going off of the egg dumping, one person asks is, should we remove some eggs if there ever gets to be too many?
No. Just from a legal perspective, these birds are protected under the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. So legally, you cannot touch any of these eggs in terms of destroying them or trying to remove them from a location, unless you have specific permits like we do for the project. But even still, we don't remove eggs Down here, we have problems with flycatchers that like to nest in our boxes as well. And even they'll chase hens out of the box to get them away. And we legally can't touch those eggs. We kind of just have to wait for the flycatchers to finish their business, and then we'll clear their nest out once their babies hatch. So it's kind of just, it is what it is, and you kind of just have to let it run its course.
Carl has a question. Just looking at the map of the collaborators, I'm curious why Alabama was missing from the collaborator list, if you have any insight.
I can't say that I do. I don't believe Alabama specifically has been a part of the official project just yet. From what I know, from how long I've been on the project, it's just been these 8 states currently. Alabama may be collecting data on this project, but they just may not be affiliated with this large scale collaborative group that we have currently.
Question from John. Is it bad practice to open the duck box to check eggs?
You know, we're opening these boxes pretty regularly, and especially once the hen has those eggs in the box, it's going to take a lot for her to leave that box and leave those eggs. She's put a lot of time and energy into those kiddos. It's going to take a lot for her to want to up and leave. So opening is not that big of a thing. We check the boxes 3 days prior to their estimated hatch date every day for those 3 days leading up to their estimated hatch date. And usually all she'll do is she'll leave the box, she'll squawk a little bit, and then she usually comes back around once we leave.
Question from Dale. Do you have a recommended box size? And he also had in parentheses the floor. So
I do, Dale. Let me grab my notes here actually, because I can tell you what our box sizes here in Florida and Georgia are, and these are the ones that we generally tend to use. So these will be an internal volume, so in centimeters. So this will be about 25.8 centimeters by 25 centimeters by 65 centimeters are usually the box sizes that have had the most success here in the South. But if you want specific plans, you can go to the Ducks Unlimited website, and they actually provide building plans and what supplies you'll need in order to build boxes for yourself. And they have more distinct measurements and a supply list for you there.
Next question from Jeff. Any thoughts using pit tags?
Yeah, some of our collaborators are using pit tags. In Louisiana, out of LSU, they're using pit tags to see if they're having a higher return rate with those. So they're actually pit tagging ducklings. They actually have this really cool setup that they've created where they've fitted pit tag readers, which is essentially like a microchip. So if you have a pet that has a microchip, it's like a little wand that you can run up and down your pet. They have a similar setup on these nest boxes where as soon as a bird goes through the entrance, it'll automatically read that bird to see if they have a pit tag inside of them. So they're testing out a couple of different protocols like that right now, and it's pretty cool. I don't know what their results are in terms of which is better, but keep an eye out for some stuff from LSU for pit tagging with ducklings probably in the next couple of years here.
Next question from Stephanie. Do hens generally lay 1 egg per day?
Yes, wood duck hens are going to lay 1 egg per day, which makes it really easy when you are going to a box, because you can usually estimate how many days that hen has been laying inside of that box. You can also use that to start to estimate when incubation started too.
Message from Joseph. What would cause a wood duck to not lay eggs?
Perhaps maybe old age. if she comes to a site and she doesn't find a suitable cavity or a nest box, but that would be, this is me just kind of making some, we'll call them semi-educated guesses. I don't know if that's exactly the answer that you're looking for, but I can't really think of anything specifically off the top of my head, mostly because that's something that would maybe be kind of hard to quantify. You would maybe need to be having radio transmitters or something on the birds to be able to actually track their movements and see if they choose to lay in, have a nest for that year.
Question from David. Would you recommend against using aspen shavings for non-waterfowl species as well, such as American kestrels?
I'm not sure yet. If you're referring to this, in David, in terms of like a bacterial standpoint, I'm not really sure yet. Hopefully, once we start analyzing our data, I'll be able to get some more educated results to you. But as of right now, just from what I've seen, it's kind of up in the air. We've got growth in both types of shavings. So until we really get a look at the intensity of bacterial growth, I won't be able to give you a direct answer tonight.
That just means we'll have to have you back for another talk.
Yeah, yes.
Another question from Julia. Who outcompetes who, the wood duck or the hooded merganser?
Ooh. I don't know if I can answer that, actually. We don't see many different species down here in our boxes. Our boxes are almost exclusively wood ducks. So in 2020, 2021, we banded 2 hooded mergansers and 4 black-bellied whistling ducks. So I wouldn't say there's really too much competition between the 2 species. I would definitely say there's a lot more competition between wood ducks themselves fighting for boxes more than other species.
Question from Corey. How do you catch the adult ducks for tagging?
We just catch them right out of the box, plug the entrance hole, and just kind of reach in and grab them right out of the box. It can be a little bit of a rodeo depending on the style of box that you've got. Some boxes in some states they've got like a depression in the box itself, so it's more like an actual cavity. Here in Florida, the entire side of the box opens. So if you're not careful when you reach in to grab the hen, you're going to have eggs rolling out all over the place. So you kind of have to be strategic with how you do it. My preferred method is to shove a pillowcase through the entrance hole so it lands on top of her. And then you can kind of slowly open the box entrance and scoop her up with her head covered so she doesn't really see you coming. The only thing you have to watch out for here is we have these absolutely monstrosity red wasps that like to hang out in the boxes as well. So if you are reaching your arm in the box and you don't check it beforehand, you're going to have a very nasty surprise from the other residents of the nest box. So do so at your own risk.
I guess a question off of that, is there a lot of cohabitating between the red wasps and the wood ducks? They don't bother each other?
Yeah, no, they don't really do anything. We've never seen hens leave due to wasps being in there. Part of that too, I would say, is most likely because the wasp nests themselves are not very large. Usually it's only 2 or 3 wasps in the box itself. However, at the start of the season, usually right now is when the battle really starts, because the wasps have really situated themselves in over the last few months that we haven't been down here. And so even today we were at a box and I lopped a wasp nest about this big off the inside of the box that was currently uninhabited, but had the potential to have some visitors over as things warm up a little bit more down here. So kind of the nature of the beast when you're working with boxes like this, but I can say from personal experience, it's not fun getting lit up by some of these wasps.
Couple more questions at the end here. From Heather, I've seen horizontal tube or log shaped nesting cavities provided. Are those specifically for wood ducks?
It can be. Yeah, there's a lot of different styles of wood duck boxes. The wooden ones are the tried and true. They're the best ones. They've been around for forever. So those are the ones that we, at this point, and until we really start to analyze our data about the boxes themselves, excuse me, those wooden boxes are the ones that we recommend the most for people to use. But I've seen nest boxes made out of just like a 5-gallon bucket. Down here, there's old Freon containers that they've turned into nest boxes, which are metal, which have to be absolutely god awful for these birds just in the summer when things really start to heat up. So you see a pretty wide range of objects that people use for wood duck boxes. But as of right now, the wooden ones are kind of like the tried and true recommended ones.
I can comment on that as well. Up here in Wisconsin, or at least we even have them at the Mequon Nature Reserve. They're more, I guess they're classified as a hen house, the tube style, where it's essentially a donut of fencing with usually natural grasses or some sort of straw around the outside, where the center is open. And typically those are usually put out for ground nesting species, mostly mallards use them. I'm not sure if mallards need the help with any more nesting areas, but we have them at the Mequon Nature Preserve along with wood duck houses as well, that we have mallards actually nesting up off the ground. And I believe this is the last question. John, is there any data that shows the same duck comes back to the same duck box year over year?
Yeah, so that kind of plays into that concept of Phyllopatry that we've mentioned kind of at the beginning of the presentation. Wood ducks are very phylopatric. It was 40% return to the same box that they use every single year, and about 70% will return to the same pond or locale for nesting each year. So yeah, there's been a pretty significant amount of data, maybe not so much in the last 5-10 years or so, but a lot of our established literature from the 60s, 70s, 80s, that's still used to this day to talk about wood ducks, details that heavy Phyllopatry in wood ducks.
Perfect. I think that is it for all the questions. So I just want to thank Jake so much for giving up his Wednesday evening. I know you're in the Eastern time zone down there. So
I'm actually in Central, where I'm at in
you
Florida
are.
right
All right.
now.
So you're not an hour ahead of us. All right. So it's not too late then. It's still 8 o'clock. And then I just want to thank everybody else for coming. We do have a few announcements with regards to the OWBC and any future, some future events that are coming up. I know Mary and Carl might, if they want to say what they have. And
sure can. So I just want to remind people that the next Bird Club meeting will be sponsored by River Edge Nature Center, and it is on March 2nd. And the speaker will be Liz Hersman from the Horicon Marsh, and she'll be talking about birding by ear. So please join us for that. If you wish to get the Zoom link, you can do that by either emailing me at River Edge, so it's just mhollebeck@riveredge.us, or get on our website and click on the events calendar, and that'll bring you to the page where you can get the Zoom link too. So once you're in that event page, click on March 2nd, and the Zoom link will be within that area on our website. So hope to see you next week or next month on the 2nd for that program.
perfect. Carl, do you want to say anything?
No, I think that's enough. I think people should watch. If the coalition works the way it's supposed to, all 4 organizations and the Bird Club should be providing information and links to all of these programs. So whatever organization you're comfortable with and familiar with, you should be able to look to their their websites. The Bird Club, the Cut-Right Bird Club is a very loose organization. It has no dues or anything like that. And so if anybody wants to join that, they can simply email me, and we'll put you on our email list as well. So and information on that is also on the River Edge website.
Perfect. Yeah, and definitely feel free, if you're on Facebook, to like the OWBC Facebook page. And then a lot of our organizations are sharing the information through that Facebook page. I think that's probably definitely the best way to get a lot of that information from. And then, yeah, just keep track of these organizations, River Edge, Knoll, J. Cut-Right Bird Club, Lac Loran Conservancy, Friends of Cedarburg Bog, and there'll be various opportunities to partake. Hopefully, as the weather gets better, we'll be doing some outside events. It'll probably be a little bit less people available to be able to attend those events, but definitely watch those emails and social media and stuff like that, so you can get on the registration and get a spot reserved.
I should mention one other thing, and that is those of you who are disappointed that we were snowed out for Gene Jacobs' red-shouldered hawk and snowy owl presentation. It has been rescheduled in the April slot. So the first Wednesday in April, you can look forward to that program. And that also will be on that Facebook page too.
Yes, and that has an in-person option as well at Lac Loran, as well as a Zoom. If you're not able to attend, Gene Jacobs will be there. And hopefully, I think he might be bringing a feathered friend along as well. So definitely encourage you to attend in person. But again, if you're don't feel comfortable, there's a Zoom option. So that'll be fantastic. And we look forward to the future events. And I just want to say thanks to Jake again for kicking off our first event here, and definitely wish you the best of luck on the rest of your semester. And we'll definitely keep in touch and maybe get you back for another speaking engagement once you figure out some of those bacteria swabs. But
I'd second that, and I'd also thank both Nick and Corey for hosting tonight. So thank you.
no problem.
Yeah, I just want to make one comment too that I think is important, is that, it's nice that, some of you may not have heard of Mequon Nature Preserve or Lac Loran or whatever it may be. So these are all great organizations that provide excellent birding opportunities as well. So it's nice to be able to have some connections with these other organizations, to go to different places and experience different birding events and different organizations. So, definitely check out the other organizations that are involved in this programming and putting this together, and hopefully you'll be able to check out some new birding spots. So that's another hope that we have with this as well.
Fantastic.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. Well, hopes everybody have a good rest of the night, and we'll see you next month.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jake.
Thanks, Jake.